My name is Kenny Dyal and I want to welcome you to the Scuba Diving channel. This channel is for anybody that is aquatically inclined or just aquatically curious. Our next guest is Mitch Hall, who actually owns and operates a hyperbaric medical treatment facility. There's a lot of myths surrounding the hyperbaric chamber, something as divers we're all afraid we're gonna get stuck into, but apparently that's not the only reason they use those things. And also I was mind blown by how commercial divers get thrown into these things. I think you're gonna really love this. I had a blast checking out the facility, so I hope you enjoy the interview. Welcome, Mitch. You're a hyperbaric specialist. You don't just treat divers that get in accidents here.
No, in fact, 90% of our patients are non-divers. Chronic non-healing wounds, bone infection, traumatic brain injury. You can have a chronic wound, so that means you have an underlying condition that's preventing you from healing like you normally would, or you just want to rapid heal a wound. So those are a couple of different ways that you would come to us.
So it sounds to me like this is some sort of time machine.
It kind of can be looked at that way when it comes to wound healing, because literally a scrape is going to heal 2, 3, 4 times faster. That's why it's an FDA approved medical device regulated by the FDA. 14 indications that Centers for Medicare and Medicaid will pay to have a patient treated in.
We think hyperbaric chambers is where divers that get the bends or have some sort of diving injury go for treatment. So that misconception of mine was definitely just flipped on its head. Are there any misconceptions out there that you've heard? You work here, obviously, as far as the diving community goes, is, you know, what the purpose of a hyperbaric chamber is and how it's used?
Just lack of education on how the chambers are used for divers. They're used in daily dive operations when you're using commercial divers at great depths. These are very expensive dive operations, and they want to keep those divers moving 24 hours a day. From 40 feet, they'll yank him out in 1 minute, and then in 1 more minute, they'll put him in a hyperbaric chamber and recompress him back to over 60 feet. And then they'll spend the next couple of hours bringing him back to surface pressure. This first diver is safely decompressing on the surface, not hanging under a boat in no cold water for a couple of hours trying to decompress. Keeps dive operations moving 24 hours a day, and that's what they care about. And then you'll hear about saturation divers, and it's the same concept. They work out of a hyperbaric chamber, basically. So what they'll do is, on the surface, they'll pressurize these divers to the depth that they're going to be working in. Then they'll send that whole pressurized chamber down to that depth. The divers will get out, they'll do their work, they'll get back into that chamber. They may get out several times, they may be down there a couple of weeks. And then they'll get back in that chamber and they'll bring them up to the surface.
Wait, weeks?
Weeks underwater without coming to the surface.
Do they have TVs down there?
No, they don't. It's very cramped quarters. It's not pretty, but they get big bucks for doing it. They'll bring them back to the surface. They're still pressurized at that depth that you were working in. They'll maintain that depth, and they'll take up to 30 days to bring them back to surface pressure.
Whoa.
Yes.
30 days?
30 days to decompress.
To decompress.
Yes, sir. It's also very hard on the body. So a saturation diver has a short career.
When you're down there, are you just walking around as like liquid nitrogen man?
You're breathing oxygen and helium. It's helium because it's less toxic than oxygen at great depths for long periods of time. Your gas mixture is very different than what you would breathe out of a recreational scuba tank. Yeah, you'll hear the divers talk over the radio, and they talk like this, and it's very funny, and sometimes it's hard to understand what they're saying, but the seasoned comms guys, they can understand these divers on helium.
Can they throw a little sound filter on there where everybody's back down? What's a common injury that you see that brings people in?
We get a lot of referrals from Dan, the Divers Alert Network. There are some diehard divers out there that just insist that they're immune to dive tables. They'll dive down to 60 feet, come back up, dive down to 60 feet, come back up, and just do this over and over all day long. And they end up building up some nitrogen and getting it stuck in their bodies. And so they'll come in for a type 1 DCS or a mild type 2 DCS. It can manifest in different ways. It can be a rash, it can be an ache, it can be numbness. And We put them in the chamber and recompress them, and they'll be at 60, 90 feet for an hour, and then we'll bring them up slowly to another depth for another hour, and then we'll bring them up slowly to another depth for another hour. So treating these takes several hours. We do not here at this facility treat major type 2 DCS, which is your arterial gas embolism and things like that. Those require what's called a multi-place chamber, which you can fit more than one person in the chamber, as well as medical monitoring equipment, and doctors can come and go into this hyperbaric chamber. This can take up to 12 hours to treat a diver, and sometimes multiple times.
The injuries are mostly from disregarding the tables?
I've seen people that will insist that they stuck to the dive tables. And then I've had divers come in and just plain old admit to me that they just dove outside the limits.
Dive tables or dive computer, your non-decompression diving limits, which is what most divers are trained to
Correct.
follow.
These tables are in place for a reason. They've been studied and studied and restudied. The United States Navy developed most of the dive tables that we have available today, and they've put extensive research into it, and they push the limits of these soldiers to see what their bodies could stand up to, and did it repeatedly and found the same results in different people. So that's how they came up with these dive tables, and that's why the dive tables are out there and that they're important. It can, over time, have long-lasting permanent damage.
So someone that may have gotten the bends is probably more susceptible
They
in
are.
the future. They are.
They
so
are.
That's a
That's a
proven-
known fact.
Okay.
Yeah.
Okay. You never want to tell anyone not to be so cautious, but is there something that maybe people are a little too scared of out there?
I would say oxygen toxicity. It just sounds horrendous, right?
Yeah.
You know, in a blink of an eye, you're going to go into a seizure, spit out your regulator, and you're going to drown. That can happen, okay? But keep in mind, I fill this chamber here with 100% oxygen, and I keep somebody at 60 feet for an hour.
Whoa.
Okay? They're not having seizures. Now, if you get into great depths, spending an incredible amount of time there, oxygen toxicity is real. It can happen. And again, we talked about sticking to your dive plan, stick to your dive tables, and I will tell everybody to always do that and never waver from that. However, also know that you're not going to have enough mix in your tank to spend 30 minutes at 120 feet. You're going to breathe that up, you know, so you're going to run into a different problem before you run into oxygen toxicity.
Okay.
You're going to be in an out of air situation, racing to the surface, and you're going to be more likely to get an AGE, ulterior gas embolism.
And that's from holding your breath going up and going up too fast, or a combination of the two, correct?
Correct.
And that is the biggest boogeyman out there.
It is.
Is there a commonly held belief in the dive medicine community that you just passionately disagree with?
Embracing the many viable uses for hyperbaric chambers in treating illnesses. In Europe, for example, there are hundreds and hundreds of conditions that they treat. They load people up every day, all day long, fill these chambers with people, treat them, send them out. Our medical system is crazy to get something approved. Now, there are 14 indications, I mentioned that earlier, that the FDA does put their blessing on, but they just slow roll it, and to the point that half of the dive community thinks that it's not viable simply because the FDA hasn't given their final blessing on it. And the truth of the matter is, the reason that the FDA doesn't give their approval on it is because we don't have all of those expensive studies that the FDA requires. And the reason we don't have all those expensive studies that the FDA requires is that this method of treatment cannot be copyrighted, cannot be trademarked. It's out there for anybody to use. And so they make zero money by proving how effective it is. Whereas if they find a drug that will help that condition, they can copyright that, they can trademark that, and they can make $1 squillion using drugs instead of using oxygen.
How do we get hyperbaric chambers into the mainstream for all the other treatments?
It's happening. It is. It's happening on its own. It's grassroots stuff.
What was the scariest moment for you in hyperbaric medicine, using chambers?
I had a patient that had a heart attack in the chamber. Now keep in mind,
Yikes.
yeah, nothing to do with hyperbarics. They were just not healthy. And a lot of people that are in the hyperbaric chamber have comorbidities that have brought them to the hyperbaric chamber. When you put this machine under pressure, it takes a few minutes to relieve that pressure before you can open the door. Fortunately, having a heart attack in the hyperbaric chamber is the best place to have a heart attack because your body is saturated with oxygen.
Well, I gotta ask, what happened?
So I got her out, I gave her CPR until medics arrived, and she survived just fine.
And she's okay.
But it was scary, no doubt.
So you see someone having a heart attack in there.
Yeah.
Mitch, when you first started this, you probably had a mental picture of what your business would be like. Was there anything where you're like, whoa, I did not know that was going to be part of all this?
I would have to say wound care caught me off guard. I learned about the clinical side of hyperbarics when I was at Commercial Dive Academy and was becoming a hyperbaric chamber operator. Going through the certification process, you learn about the clinical side of it also. And a lot of the stuff that they talked about was the effects of stroke and burn victims and things like that hyperbarics helps for. But until I opened my doors and physicians started sending me some pretty major wounds, I was not prepared for that.
People coming in here missing an arm, oh, it's just a flesh wound,
Well, it's some pretty gnarly stuff that we've seen.
I would like to kind of talk directly to the new divers out there. Should we be afraid of this thing?
Absolutely not. No, absolutely not. The only contraindication to a hyperbaric chamber is a untreated pneumothorax. That would be a hole in the pleural cavity of the lungs. If gas gets in there and can't get back out, we're bringing you up, it's expanding, causes a lung collapse. That's it. Other than that, anybody can go in a hyperbaric chamber. You should not be afraid of one. It is your friend. If you're feeling bad after a dive, get in a hyperbaric chamber.
But at the end of the day, we shouldn't be paranoid over this.
Not at all.
We should enjoy our dives, stick to our tables.
Yeah, we're not treating divers every day.
Don't come to the chamber because you're forced to. Come because you want to.
Exactly.
And that's the best way to visit a hyperbaric chamber.
That's the best way.
Well, Mitch, thank you so much.
Really
appreciate your time and letting me hang out by the time machine here. This is really cool. If you want the full-length, uncensored interview, go to sweetwaterscuba.com.